assume he's not coming at this point.
Oh, yeah.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. We will go ahead and get started. Today is June 27th, 2003. Welcome to the Great Falls International Airport Authority Board meeting. As a reminder, the mission of Great Falls International Airport Authority is to optimize transportation services and development in our region, and the vision of the Great Falls International Airport is to maximize the airport's benefit to our region. Welcome to all of our guests. Thank you for being here. If you have any comments, we'd love to hear what you have to say. Just please stand and identify yourself, and we'll hear what you have to say. With that said, I will call the meeting to order, and we'll start with the roll call. Commissioner Eritz.
Here.
Commissioner Gibbs.
Here.
Commissioner Hoban.
Present.
Commissioner Husted is absent. Commissioner Lalonde is here. Commissioner Thompson.
Here.
And Commissioner Timbo.
Here.
Perfect. We have a quorum present. Let's start the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, starting with the consent agenda. The consent agenda is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have a significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion or vote by any board member. This month we have item A, approval of board meeting minutes for May 2023. Item B, payroll checks for May totaling $113,588.25. Item C, maintenance and operations checks number 27524 to 27586, totaling $168,094.86. Item D, approved passenger facility charge totaling $63,716.72. And item E, financial reports for May 2023. Does any board member have an item they would like to pull for discussion or vote? Crickets, perfect. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Got a motion? Any further discussion? How about a second?
I'll second that.
All right, I have a motion and second on the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And nay. The ayes have it. Director's report.
Yes, happy end of year, everybody, our last meeting of the fiscal year. I'll just briefly go through the profit and loss budget versus actual, just to point out a couple things. On page 10, if you looking down at line 408100, you can see our parking revenue is likely to exceed $1 million. It's the first time we've ever exceeded $1 million in a year, even back to our busiest years, 14 and 15. By the time we get through this month, we'll be well over $1 million. In fact, we might even approach $1.1 million, which would be what we budgeted for the upcoming year, which is a good sign. As you might remember, we didn't have Minneapolis back until February of this fiscal year, so we can anticipate next year's parking to be ahead of this year's parking. And so that's an exciting development as we continue to reap the benefits of taking over that parking operation and converting to self-pay. As you look down through the category of revenues for the year, it generally reflects that we under budgeted. We really had no idea how well passengers would come back. If you fast forward back to March of a year ago, there was still some question as to how many flights might drop out of our schedule and how many passengers might return. And so we are significantly above what was planned for the budget last year. And as we pointed out in the last meeting, when you look ahead to the budget this year, things like food and beverage, on this year's budget, we're going to be 40-50% above what we had budgeted for the last year. And so when you look at the budget to budget of the 2 years, we're budgeting a 70% increase, things like that. It's mainly because we under budgeted for the current year. So that's really encouraging. On the expense side, over on page 13, when you look at the total expenses, we are literally right up against the budget. I think we're going to come in within the budget we had last year. It's going to be very close. We do have that 2% increase that the board approved last month. we may fall outside of the budget for this year. I just processed the payments for this last conference we went to, the Jumpstart Airline Conference. Acquiring that data is exceptionally expensive, and we ended up with 8 meetings. So we have to provide 8 sets of data. So I think the total budget for that conference is going to be somewhere near $20,000. So we'll have a couple of very large year-end expense to meet with the airlines there, and so I do think we'll probably be into that budget modification we approved last month. But for the most part, I think a pretty solid fiscal year, revenue well exceeding budget, and expenses right at the budget limit. So excited with that. Looking at May's performance, all the airlines reported pretty solid load factors. Delta Salt Lake performing a little less strong than we would like, about 75% load factor. Really love to see that up to 80% load, which I think we'll get there in June. But May was a little lighter than we had hoped. We're trailing 2019 by only about a little less than 200 boardings. So I think by the time we get into June, we should be very close to 2019, maybe even beyond 2019 for the calendar year. So solid airline performance. Everybody's very full, with the exception of that little bit of weakness in the Salt Lake flight. We had good meetings at Jumpstart. As I said, we met with 8 airlines. The underlying theme of the entire conference really is continued problems with pilot shortage. For the first time, I'm starting to hear the Regional Airline Association is pushing back a little bit on the requirements that were put in place just before COVID. And essentially what they're saying is, I hadn't thought of it this way, what they would like to do is relieve the requirement for the co-pilot to have a full 1,500 hours. It used to be prior to the pandemic that you didn't have to have an air transport license to be a co-pilot. The pilot had to have that, and that requires the 1,500. And the change that they've made is requiring both pilots to have that license, which requires the 1,500. So they're suggesting maybe that we could roll back that requirement for the co-pilot only, which would increase the number of co-pilots available, which might produce pilots faster, because then you could fly as co-pilot, get paid, and get into that pilot seat quicker. Whereas now what's happening is it's actually the co-pilots, in a sense, that are clogging up the works, because they're having to pay to get that 1,500 flight hours, either paying on their own or going through getting accepted to a United flight school or something like that, and they're not out there working and getting paid during that 1,500 hours. So their suggestion, which actually is a pretty artful suggestion, is what if we just put it back the way it was, and then allowed the 1,500 hours to come with a paycheck for that co-pilot. The other thing they're pushing pretty hard to do is try and move the required retirement age from 65 up to 67 with an aptitude test. Of course, it remains to be seen how many pilots would be interested in that. Obviously, that's a voluntary thing. But I would think there are quite a few pilots that enjoy their job, and they're very senior at that point. They're not flying a ton. They control their own schedule. They're going to parts of the world they like to be in at that point, and so possibly that could provide some relief. And so they're working very hard to try and push for that. My plan is to contact that association and see if there's anything we can do to lend support through potentially Senator Tester's on the transportation subcommittee in the Senate. And so anything we can do to help encourage that, I think, would be good. Obviously, the pilots union, or maybe not obviously, the pilots union is against any of those. They really see it as an opportunity to dilute the labor pool. So they really want to see those things stay in place. They're going to claim that it's safer to have pilots retirement at 65 and having those additional hours in the co-pilot position, those types of things. So there is a little bit of a pushback there, but hopefully we'll see some progress there. I was actually shocked at the conference to talking to a lot of my colleagues I hadn't seen in a few years, how many of them, airports in growing states in the Dakotas and other places are nowhere near the 2019 boardings, and mainly because they can't get flights. I had thought mostly that a lot of the markets that lost service had recovered at this point, but it doesn't seem as though they all have. Many of those airports are still 20-30% below where they were back in 19, and so I guess in a sense I feel very fortunate to be where we are. We'd like to be well ahead of 19, like many of the other airports in the state, Of course, that comes with population growth, which they have had and we haven't. But nonetheless, makes you hungry for more success. And meeting some of your compatriots that are in the opposite position, 20% below where they were in 19, humbles you a little bit as to the opportunities we've had. So interestingly, in talking to some of those industry experts, about 400 planes have been retired since the pandemic, primarily the regional jets that we see right here on this airfield. But the airlines have ordered a whole bunch more narrow bodies. And so with no pilots out there to fly these narrow bodies, some industry forecasts show a total of 1,300 regional jets being grounded in the next few years as those narrow bodies are delivered because there aren't enough pilots to fly them. Even the airframes that remain in the air are flying on average 30 to 40% less block hours than they were prior to the pandemic. So there is a lot less flying than there was a few years ago, and we see that right here in our market with United, for example, where we normally have 3 flights a day. We now have 2 very large flights per day on those 2 Airbuses. And even that Chicago flight, which before pandemic was a 76-seater daily, now we're at an Airbus only once a week, and I think that's likely to be the pattern that we would see a mainline less frequently on that route as they grow back into that service. And so that presents its own challenges in a market like ours where we don't have the population growth to fall back on as we get times of the year where we can't fill a larger airplane, like for instance, the first quarter we did very poorly on that Salt Lake route. The iterations of service are so much larger. So when a flight gets dropped, you no longer have that 50-seater in there where you're just taking 50 seats out of the market, which is roughly 10% of our daily demand. Historically, Great Falls has always had about 500, 600 people a day trying to travel in and out. So that's 10% demand with one flight. Now you're talking about a plane, in the case of the Airbus, where you might be dropping 140 seats out if you can't fill that flight 60, 70% full all year round. So the iteration of service that pulls out is so huge that it really raises the risk to a market like us if we can't fill those mainline planes over time. And so that's a challenge we face going forward. Those larger planes are much more efficient, especially now that the salaries are getting closer together between a regional pilot and a mainline pilot. The larger airframe is more fuel efficient, it's more crew efficient. It takes the same number of people basically to fly a large regional jet as it does a small mainline. And so the cost basis, if you have more passengers, is much lower with that mainline flight. And so certainly on ground handling, about the same number of people, everything. So the fixed cost of those mainline planes now is very close to the fixed cost of that regional jet. The airlines are trying to fly more and more of those mainline planes. Markets like us, that just represents risk going forward because again, let's say we have to fill all 140 seat planes in a market that only has, say, 600 people on a peak day. There may not be enough room in there for 3 or 4 airlines. If you only get 1 flight a day during a downturn, that's an easy market for airlines to drop, and indeed they've dropped over 76 airport routes in the last 5 years in total. 76 routes are completely gone. That makes it much more of a risk that we could see our market dropped in a downturn. So those trends continue to be out there and something that we've got to be concerned about. Overall, I thought the conversations with all the airlines were very positive. Of the 8 meetings we had, I think most of those airlines that aren't already serving us show interest in serving us in the future. Obviously, there's some organizational difficulties. In the case of Southwest, their ground handling union only allows them to have, I think, 3 markets that they can contract out for ground handling. So that really requires them to be in a market with about 6 flights a day because when they use their own people, they have to pay a full 8-hour workday. For them to cover that cost, they need about 6 flights a day. Again, when you're flying a 140-seat plane, that's more boardings than we even have. So it takes a market of about 1.5 million to fit a Southwest into it. And even then, they have to control a dominant market share to fit into that size market. They're hoping to change that in the future as they renegotiate these labor contracts to allow them to contract ground handling in more markets. Like in our case, a Worldwide that handles an Allegiant, they're here a couple days a week. It's a part-time job for somebody. They're not getting paid when they're not here. That would be the way a Southwest in the future might operate, is in some markets they would have a share ground handler with another airline, or potentially use an FBO like Home and Aviation to service that flight if they're only in here a couple days a week. Under their current structure, that's not possible, but they do see in the future that that might change. So we continue to have meetings with them and talk about a future that we don't know when that'll come, but at some point that will change. In the case of American, they're really struggling with pilots, trying to get pilots in there. We're a fairly long market from Dallas, 1,300 miles. So that conversation is going well, but it doesn't seem like we're right on the edge of anything happening there. So I think what we're going to do is amend that SCASD grant to pick up LA as a potential market. In fact, all of California will amend that grant so that California is represented in there, which would allow us to use that grant in a couple different markets. We're going to start working on that next week and introduce that to DOT to see if they'd make that change. That would just increase the flexibility using those dollars. We have 3 years to use them. In fact, I think because it was issued during the pandemic times, they give us a 4th year, but I think we have to ask for that. So we'll have 3 years no matter what. We got that grant in August of last year, so we still haven't even crossed a year yet, but we'll definitely amend that so we have more options with it. We spoke to a number of ultra low-cost carriers. There's a lot happening in that side of the industry. They're buying planes, they're expanding. I think there's real potential with some of those airlines for next year even, and we'll continue to keep those conversations going. The next opportunity to meet with everybody is in October at the Rendezvous. Missoula's hosting it this year at Paws Up, so we'll be out there in October, and that's the time of year now where planners are really getting serious about summer. So we'll have a couple months to kind of get all of our data in for summer, which is good because that tends to be our strong season. We'll be putting together our incentive letters, and then in October, hopefully making some plans to get scheduled for additional flights for next summer.
John, what's they approached the Pilot Association, they approached the FAA yet and see the receptivity to the rule change?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of comes down to the problem with the union, right? So, those political folks that are supportive of the union approach are going to be difficult to sway. Those folks that see this as a challenge, especially for small communities, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we bear the brunt of it. Those politicians that are sensitive to those smaller communities in more rural states like the Dakotas and Montana, hopefully will line up and support some kind of change. I think it's and what's difficult is we all watch the politicians get on there and rail at the holidays when the system gets stretched too thin and breaks, and oh, you bad airlines, but we're the problem, right? I mean, the regulators are the problem. We've changed things that have altered the structure of how they can schedule crews, both with crew rest, which was the first one that kind of took effect, a 10-hour and you drop dead, go to the hotel, which impacts us right here in Great Falls. I mean, I personally have been out moving snow and watched a flight that was ready to go and been sitting for half an hour on a ramp cancel because they couldn't get a positive ramp assignment in Denver, which is now required because of the Minneapolis incident where they sat out on the ramp for 3 hours and overflowed the toilets, ran out of water. So the protections were put in place that you have to let everyone off and deboard the plane, and you have to have a positive gate assignment if you're less than 90 minutes out. So you can't leave Great Falls, Montana unless you can tell that plane what gate they're going to, even though it's likely to change by the time they get there. So they sit here, and then that pilot who came in the night before only has 10 hours to be back in Denver and off the plane. So, he came in last night, he slept for 6.5 hours, he pre-flighted, he's ready to go home. And if that flight time exceeds his 10 hours, then he's got to cash it in, bring the plane back and go to the hotel. So I mean, that's how it impacts, us. And it is a safety issue. That Colgan crash caused both of those rules really to be in place, the crew rest and the one with the flight hours. what have we done, right? I mean, if we manufacture a system that's constantly breaking, we can't blame that system, because we've added rules to it that are causing it to break. And so I think it's a difficult political issue because there are sides lined up against each other. Hopefully the Regional Pilot Association will solicit some political support. I think maybe, states like us could be part of that solution. I mean, to me, going back to the co-pilot, not needing the air transport license would be a positive, and I think even the 67 change is a positive, but there will be opposition.
None of this, I mean, even the 15 hours wasn't data-based, wasn't based, it was just sort of a professional judgment call.
Absolutely.
That's a lot of hours.
It is a ton of hours. And so the folks, the experts that are lined up against changing that back are pointing out that, 1,500 hours of flight in any flight isn't the same as gaining that 1,500 hours doing your job.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, being in a commercial airplane for a large slug of that 1,500 hours, even as second seat and getting the opportunity to work in that environment is a real experience.
Well, it's great.
Right, as opposed to orbiting an airport and doing touch and goes in a plane that you're never going to fly again once you get that pilot's license. So, I mean, I think there is a pretty active debate out there with both sides, no agreement.
Well, you can get the ATP with one flight in a plane, in the plane you're trying to get certified with. You do all the sim time, then you do one flight, and now you've got it.
Right. And that's what everyone
hours though.
Huh?
You still have to have the hours though.
Oh, you still have to have the hours,
Right.
Right. But I'm talking about experience with the airplane.
1 hour.
Yeah, 1 hour in the
You get a
airplane.
type rating in a simulator.
Right.
If you've already had one type rating.
Yeah, I've already had one before.
And that's really the debate is, what quality of hours are these people accumulating? Because a lot of people are saying it makes way more sense to have them flying a commercial jet from the large slug of that and gaining that experience. So the day they get their 1,500 and move over, they're actually qualified in the plane they're flying. But
I know Captain Sullenberger credited his glider time with his ability to land that plane on the river. So it's just,
well, then that crew that, that had to land that plane, was it Sioux Falls? No, it wasn't Sioux Falls, it was Cedar City, or somewhere in the Midwest, Owl, what's his name, Captain Owl, I think his last name, but they had to fly that plane with, they had lost all hydraulics.
Oh,
And they had to fly the plane with
Sioux
only,
City.
who's Sioux City yet? With all engine control, and they hadn't had a mechanic, and I mean, that was, how they got in there and flew is, they had to have a third guy because all they could do was move the engine throttle to adjust the pitch of the plane. That doesn't, you don't get that kind of experience out there, flying sims or flying a plane that's not your commercial jet, so.
What airline are you looking at for the California?
We don't know for sure. I mean, there's definitely a lot of possibilities with that one. LA is the largest origin and destination market from Great Falls that has never really had direct service. We had Allegiant for one summer, and the biggest problem with that one is it was announced in late March, and so we only had 60 days until the flights started. And so when you look at the performance, that the first month was poor, but then once we were within the booking window where people had time to make arrangements, then that flight really picked up towards the end. So I think there's quite a few carriers. One of the discussions with the DOT will be business versus leisure, because they're going to say, well, your SCSI grant really is trying to encourage a business route like Dallas, but realistically in Montana in particular, you can't really blur those lines, right? I mean, there's a lot of inbound tourism, and that's really what we'd be counting on for the Dallas route. So if we got, let's just pick let's say we got Breeze to LA, is that any less business or leisure or more leisure than Dallas would be? Probably not. I think that we'd have a lot of local businesses that are trying to get to LA that would fly on a Breeze because it's direct and it cuts, massive numbers of hours out of the schedule. And so we've actually asked for a letter from DA Davidson to that end of, if we had direct service, it doesn't really matter who it is, or even the days of, as long as there's a couple work weekdays in there, we would likely schedule around that in order to use that route. So if it was like a Wednesday, Saturday, we would try to use that. to avoid all the wasted hours trying to fly a circuitous route now. We're also working with a group of airlines to having a discussion on employee screening. As you might know, the TSA adopted some rules. By September, airports need to have an employee screening regimen in place. We're exempt from it initially because our size airport is currently exempt, but we're only about 40,000 boardings below that exemption, and we don't know how long that exemption will be in place. My guess is they'll go forward with the larger airports, and then in a couple of years, that rule will expand to all airports, just like passenger screening did, and fences around airports before that, and all of those things. And so we're working with a group that's looking at those rule makings and trying to figure out a way that we might work with TSA to do that differently. I think the majority of folks really feel that that should be a TSA screening responsibility, much like passengers. It makes very little sense to me that after 9/11 we all realized passenger screening was more important than it was prior to that, and we needed a more monolithic approach to it, so we came up with one agency doing it by the same guidelines everywhere. Why would you do 200 agencies doing something different at every airport with employees going to the exact same place? So it makes sense to me to have one agency doing it, and so we're doing some work with them to try and come up with a better solution than what's been proposed. We'll continue to work on that. Right now, I think there's, like I said, about 3 dozen airports that are interested in having that discussion. In talking to TSA this week, it sounds like we're very close to getting our LEO reimbursement sorted out. We did get paid for 2021. We're going to make some adjustments to the agreement, and then following that, we expect to get paid for 22 and whatever we've submitted of 23 thus far. And then we should be good going forward. I think we finally have worked through that whole process. The TIF agreement was contacted by the city today. They plan to pay us about $100,000 here in the next month based on the collections that have just occurred, the June-July tax bill. And then following that, they're going to bond the remainder about a month from now. They should be working to bond that, and then we'll get the remainder of that TIF money for the development out there next to the jail. On the construction and the terminal, we are getting pretty close to having the offices all complete. United and Alaska, their floors are completed now. They've been ground and are done, and the rough ends are done. Now they're working on the ceilings and finishing up those spaces. I think by the end of July, it sounds like they'll be both moved in to the new office space. About that same time frame, we should be getting close to finishing the ticket counter area for Alaska and Allegiant. So they'll be able to move back to their final location kind of next to Delta there. They're currently out in the lobby a little ways while the terrazzo is being put in. And once we get that done, the baggage belts should be here in about September. And so we'll be putting the baggage belts in, and we'll take the bags back to the Bozeman belts, and then the Bozeman run-out belts will be done in about that same time frame too. We have most of the Bozeman belts here now. They're in the back, so we can actually start some work to get those assembled for the take-back part of it. There's the belts that go between the new take-back belts and the machines are not here yet, but they should be in about a month, so we can start assembling that stuff too. So we've got the floor patch. That's the other big thing. You may recall we hit an electrical line trying to put in some trench drain earlier this summer and shut down the routers for everybody, which was cool. The drawings had the electric down there about 36 inches. It was probably 4 inches. I think
It was in the concrete.
it was actually in the concrete, which, yeah, it was supposed to be in a vault down below. It actually wasn't. I mean, what would you think is 4 inches into the concrete, maybe?
Yeah.
So they actually hit it with a saw trying to cut in the trench drain. So that's been repaired now. We've got a couple patches in down there. Project's really moving along nicely. Bag belts are the next big challenge once we get the terrazzo done. So that's pretty exciting. Anything else on that one, Rod?
Now the IT is moving along really well. We got Alaska finally put where they belong, and United been here, got, well, United and SkyWest, they had kind of two systems, so they got that put together. They finished up a week or so
Oh,
ago.
did they? I didn't have noticed this that.
Yeah, and then Alaska was here Friday, I think, and finished their stuff up, so we got their cabinet out of Delta's area, so Delta will gain one more office. They're working in there now. Allegiant's here today doing some of their IT stuff, so that stuff's coming together good down there. And I think it's gonna be a good system.
Yeah, one of the CT80s is offline. It sounds like they're still waiting on parts.
Yeah, they got a tech here today, but I haven't heard.
That's been kind of an impediment because now the belt, the temporary belt that we put in by Delta that's supposed to take bags back to the CT80, they're just using it as a belt now, and then they take the bag off and put it over on the other belts so that they can screen it through the other CT80. Other than that, I think we're light years ahead of where we expected to be. We've been able to kind of cobble together a procedure down there so that the airlines can get to a belt and put the bags through. We weren't counting on being able to do that. We thought for the summer they would actually have to drag the bags back on a flatbed and take them to TSA, but we've been able to keep them, operating off of a belt, which has been a lot easier on their personnel over the summer. So far so good. Hopefully the other CT80 doesn't go down. That project seems to be going pretty well. The ramp work's underway. Unfortunately, the trench drain's about 4 or 5 inches too narrow. United had asked to make it wider during the design, the contractor's initial request through an RFR early on. They wanted to have more space in there to get the trench drain in and install. That was approved, but then when they poured it, they left it about 3 inches short. So they're trying to figure out what to do. It sounds like they're going to have the rebar all rebent to go into that trench.
Rebar's too wide now and some of it's too tall, so hopefully we can just rebend, or not rebend, but bend new rebar. And then the trench drain had a
Slope to it.
So all the rebar was all different sizes all the way
It's
down.
like a
So the
spine, if you can imagine.
engineers they're just now looking at if we can just have it all the same, at the same level, same depth. So just getting some structural information on that, so.
But it's just pallet after pallet of rebar out there, and it's all bent the wrong way. So unfortunately, they're going to have to rework that. But other than that, I mean, the project seems to be progressing pretty well. I think that probably adds a few weeks because fortunately the trench drain is kind of on the back of the ramp, so it really won't impact the taxi lanes or the ramp any operationally while they're messing with that. They can come and do the border right now, which is what they're working on between the existing ramp and the new ramp. They've got to take out some partial panels all along that lip and re-pour all that, which is the next big phase that they'll be working on. But they should be done in about, what, you think, 6 weeks now?
Yeah, I'd say they've got most of the excavation done. They got a little bit to go, and they're down to their required depth there, so they'll be just doing testing on that material and then start bringing in the new material and
Hopefully.
compacting everything out. Doesn't seem like there was any soft spots out there right now,
Good.
so that's what we ran into last year.
You may recall we had to excavate down an extra 3 feet, I think it was, in some places.
Some places,
So we
yeah.
hit soft dirt, just where the old 7 was. They must not have grubbed it out very far before they built on top of the existing soil. So there's quite a bit of organics in there and some soft clay, and that all had to come out. So
Who pays for that mistake? We do?
yeah,
It's our
Yeah.
fault?
it's not our fault, but it's a condition that that isn't the contractor's fault. They had a sampling out there; they just didn't happen to hit it. I mean, when you look at this, where they pulled cores out of, our engineer, where they pulled cores out of, I mean, they practically went right around it, but they didn't happen to hit it.
Yeah.
So it didn't show up in the core anywhere. If they would have found it in the core, then we would have planned to grub that out and put in more material. But they didn't happen to hit it in the corings, the required corings, and so it's just unforeseen condition is what it's called. And so the FAA typically allows us to amend the grant and add more costs to it to have all that taken out. We had some material on site they were able to use.
Yeah, we used some of the old SRE stuff.
Yeah. We had some extra material left over that they were able to use. We didn't have the full cost of filling that back in. And then, didn't they find some concrete somewhere they were able to use, some busted concrete?
Yeah, they had some crushed concrete.
Some crushed concrete. That works pretty well because it's
Yeah.
absorbent, you know, so I mean, that, you can get that into kind of a hole. And there could be a spring down there. I mean, that's another potential. There might be some subsurface water in that area that kind of is chewing up the sandstone. I'm actually surprised we don't have more of that activity because when you drive around the airport, there's cattails on the hillside everywhere. But I've never seen a spring. I mean, most airports, like even Seattle, there's springs everywhere that pop through the concrete. But we don't seem to have that.
We have just a couple wet spots.
A couple wet spots.
And they sell that old rebar, or bad rebar?
Or recycle it, I don't know. It's real short.
It's specially bent, you know, it's in hoops with hooks, and it's all different widths. And
Now that one isn't our fault. That was, they had designed it and asked for a change to make it easier to install because the trench they thought was too narrow to build. So they had asked. I think we were at 3 feet initially. They wanted 5 feet, but then we got billed at like 4.7 for some reason. It was just off where they poured. I thought they might try to sock cut it, but of course that would be awful also. It was a lot of work because that concrete's.
there's enough concrete out there. It's like 17 inches thick.
17 inches of concrete to sock cut, that's a long day. So, but it is going to add some time, but it'll be done well before the snow flies. I think it's going to be a real good project when we get done. So, and then access control. We met with the locksmith and FICO a couple weeks ago, the contractor, to go over some of the access control issues. The biggest problem we're having right now is those doors. They're original to the building, 1970s doors back there, and it's almost all in brick and concrete on the back of the building. So really the only option, we have 2 options. We could pull the whole thing out and rebuild the entire door in order to use more modern locks, or we can use magnetic locks. My experience with the magnetic locks on the frame is they do get hit from time to time, and they get out of alignment. And you can imagine someone carrying through a stroller and they hit the top of the door and smack that lock on the top, and then it's not aligned right. So when the door comes in, those 2 contacts don't meet, and then the door's not locked. It'll close, and you think it's locked. And even the monitor that's in the frame that says, oh, the 2 meet up, the door's shut. So the electronic alarm system that we're going to have that says that door's not shut or it's shut, it's going to say it's shut, but it's not locked because that external lock is not aligned. So we've asked the FICO to go back and just look for something that we might be able to strengthen that mount with. Whether that's some additional metal across there that kind of keeps it in a channel or something like that. See if there's an option just to make sure that those don't get jostled loose. Because my experience with those locks is they do get hit and then they're not aligned right and the door won't lock. So nonetheless, it's better than what we have, but we want to make sure when we get these in that we're not constantly fidgeting with that adjustment and inheriting a maintenance item. Other than that, we expect drawings from them any time now. They said toward the end of June we should be able to get some drawings of what all they want to do. And then they should be starting some installations here pretty soon, running some cable, getting connectivity out to all the different locations where we'll have access control and locks. And then shortly after that, starting some door installations. So I'm pretty excited to see that project coming along. Anything new on signage, Rod?
No, I met with Tobacco and the sign company and stuff a couple weeks ago now, almost 2 weeks ago. But it's progressing now. We had a couple hurdles there with the sign company, but I think we're on track now. That things are starting to get built. I should be getting us some mock-ups of some of the letters here shortly, and then Those are being built in Iowa, but should be here, some mock-ups pretty soon.
And this project will replace all the external signage on this side, and it'll get rid of the big blue sign over the escalators, and then the one that faces that one will actually come down completely. We've decided we don't need that messaging. We're just gonna rely on the one big board over the escalators. And that's all I've got.
Any updates on the condo tenants?
No, nothing new on the tenants. We did talk to Dick Anderson last week, and I think we've sent in the final piece we need to pull the permit, right, Rob?
Yeah.
So we had one more form we needed to fill out to get the permit. We've got that sent in, and then the steel should be showing up any day now. We've got some new signs we're gonna put up along the interstate, and then some new boards we're gonna put on a couple of the signage boards in the back in the secure area. Just letting people know there's industrial space for lease out there too. We did have a couple people that we've sent information to, just leads we've gotten off LoopNet that have contacted us, and so there's a couple folks out there. Everybody's still everybody we talk to continues to say there's demand for industrial space and there's nothing available. And really, I think as we start getting some vertical out of the ground, that hopefully we'll get more interest in that in the space. But no, nothing firm yet.
Any progress on our grass airstrip?
I haven't talked to those guys in a while. I bumped into the one fellow that's
James?
Yeah, James. I bumped into him not long ago, and they're working through the property side because they've determined the best thing to do is to do a lease amendment. And that side of the house takes a very long time to get engaged. But we had a briefing with them, gosh, was that about a month ago?
Yeah.
Maybe more. And they're progressing towards, putting a lease amendment out there. We kind of talked about the things we'd like to do. We'd really like, just, a lease is a real property action in the FAA's mind, so there'll have to be some compensation for that. And what we said is, we would just like to borrow dirt from the airfield right next to that landing strip, and what we'd like to do is pull it back, the ditch back, so that we can make a retaining pond that would allow more development in the future. It would just make an area that we could store water, and that would give them some dirt, for the project too. So we'd like to work in that form because they need dirt. We have dirt. If they pulled it from the right spot, it could really benefit us going forward, all of us really, because as they build more space over there, we're at the point now where any new impervious we build, we've got to come up with a way to store water. So like even the terminal ramp expansion, or not terminal ramp, but the, what do you guys call that? Just the ramp expansion, the cargo ramp expansion that they did a few years ago brought us right up to the limit. So now we have no more storage area for water. We have to build more. So if they could borrow from there and enlarge an area that we could use for storage, then it benefits them in the future and us too as we build more impervious space.
On the guard side, they kind of went back to the drawing board now that it's going to be basically a real property kind of action, so it's back at the Guard Bureau in DC. So not a particularly fast moving organization, so still in progress, but it'll probably still be a little while before they get the lease worked out.
So it's still alive?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I'm sure it'll probably happen. It just takes longer when you do it for a property action.
Is it just me, or is nobody excited to get anything done anymore?
I'd say
I
that's
mean,
true.
nobody wants to get, how tough is it to put a grass strip in?
Well, with property actions, I can tell you it's always been that way. I mean, because doing it.
I'm just talking about landing a plane on grass.
Yeah.
I mean, let's walk the field, kick out the big rocks, and put up a couple flags and call it good. For gosh sakes, people, can't we get anything done?
Well, just remember though, it's not a grass strip anymore. It's a gravel strip. Yeah. There'll be a lot less planes that want to use that. He's a pretty bumpy dude.
Tail draggers.
Oh.
All right, anything else on director's report? Questions, comments, concerns? Perfect. All right, we'll move on. Item number 1, authorization to accept bids for canopy project.
Yes, the board last fall approved budget for 2 separate projects. It was at the time the front canopy and the west vestibule. The combined budgets are $1.15 million. And we told the board at the time we would likely combine those two. It's a matter of how quickly we could get the design going. But now the designs have met up and it's the same type of work, so it makes sense to bid them together. But the project won't be ready to bid until next month. Since we don't have a July meeting, we'd like to get permission to go ahead and accept bids, assuming that we get a recommendation from our engineer that the bids are compliant and they fall within the approved budget. Normally, we do have a bid acceptance at the board, and the main reason we do that is if anyone wants to object to the bids we've gotten, like maybe the second bidder thinks the first bid is not fair, or if the public just thinks it's a bad project, we like to allow that opportunity for anyone to come in. And so our attorney has told us several times we don't have to do that step. We just like to do that as a matter of course in the process of bidding projects. And so we would like the permission to go ahead and accept bids next month when we receive those, so we can get that project underway. Obviously, we're late in the building season, and so those first few weeks of August will be vital to ensure that we get this project going in time for winter. It's a little later than we'd like to go. We typically don't like starting projects this late, but getting the design done and with switching engineers, and this west vestibule project was partially designed before by CH, but we got no bids on it, so we've made a few adjustments to it, and now we're a little bit behind schedule, so we'd like permission to accept those bids next month.
So Mick did sign off on this.
Yeah,
Didn't have any concerns.
Yeah, and we've asked him the same question several times. You know, it's always said the same thing. You don't have to do that. The main reason we do it is when we do have a bid objection, it's good to have immediate remedy for somebody so they can come in right away and complain about it. We get relatively few challenges. We've had a few in the last 10 years. Pretty rare. I can think of 2. Again.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Motion to award the canopy project lowest responsible bidder under the specified conditions.
Okay, I have a motion and a
I'll
comment.
second it.
Perfect. Got a motion and a second. Any additional comments?
How long do we have to spend the infrastructure money? We have to do 24?
The bill money, when did they limit the bill money to, Steve? I've not heard of them.
We get it for the 5 years, but then you have a certain number of time after that. I think it's 2028 we have to have it all
Just finish it.
certified.
Yeah, all the money that we had to spend, there's some money that comes due this winter, I think, isn't it? For some reason, is it November? The CARES and the ARPA?
Yeah, those packages need to be done, but our bill money we can spend up
Yeah.
through the 5 years.
We've already fully spent our ARPA and CARES, and it's a good thing. I learned at the conference last month that, or well, actually it was early this month, but I learned that the money that got clawed back by Congress in the budget is all the non-committed money that was under CARES and ARPA. So if you hadn't already had a grant authorization, that money was clawed back. So there are some airports losing some of that capital.
Any other questions? Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye and nay. The ayes have it. Item 2, audit agreement extension.
Yes, as we have talked about the last couple of months, we are near the end of our fiscal year again. And our auditor is no longer going to do government audits going forward. Our longtime auditor, through several ownership changes, I think Kenyon now has been the airport's auditor for, gosh, coming up on two decades. So we've got a long-term relationship with them. They do the majority of the audits in the state for airports, but they're no longer able to staff experts in government auditing. And so they have a couple of contracts that had a few years left, and so they're willing to extend an offer to us to have the audit done one more year, which we think makes sense with Shailene being new, and trying to get the year closed out and get us through the end of this fiscal year, since the audit was just completed about 90 days ago. It makes sense to try and get her through one more audit year with the current auditor, and then make that transition to a new auditor next year. And so we'd like the board's permission to move forward with a one-year extension opinion in an amount not to exceed $50,000 to complete the audit of fiscal year 23.
So this agreement goes through December 31st of this year.
Yeah.
What happens after that?
We're going to RFP for a new auditor. The board approved.
Yes, sorry, but
Oh.
this agreement for this audit, if they're not done by December 31st, which is.
I think drawing
Yes,
and quartering is the.
Yeah.
Well, the contract has 12/31, it'll be done by then, so they would have to go
It'll be on
and
them.
and do an amendment of that
Yeah.
to extend the time frame.
I'm certain that they'll, I would hope, we've emphasized enough that we really need to get this
Yeah.
done. So, and I don't think they want to drag it out either because they're trying to wrap up that whole line of practice, so.
That'll be my going away present. For 6 years being on the board, is our audit's out by 12/31 at midnight.
Well,
We'll do that.
and you may recall, we like to have it done in November because we typically don't have a meeting in December. So.
We'll have it
Yeah.
right before the party.
Right.
Did you ever have that discussion that you suggested about them starting earlier than September?
Oh,
Just
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
do that.
Megan is aware that, we need to get going on this year. And that'll help Shailene too, I think, because she's got plenty on her hands right now too. So, yeah, I think as, Shailene's gone this week, but if she gets back next week, we really need to start on all the closeout work to make sure we got everything together for the auditor so they can get going.
Okay.
Any additional comments? Can I get a motion to extend the contract with Pinion for 1 year at a cost not to exceed $50,000?
So moved.
Got a motion, any additional comments? Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye and nay. The ayes have it. Item number 3, capital project, rental car wash rehabilitation.
As we discussed last month, we've got the TIF money that we collect from the passengers on their contracts for rental cars that we accumulate for the use of repair and maintenance and expansion of rental car facilities. Over the last couple of months, we've identified a couple things that we need to get done. The right side of the car wash is pretty much worn out on the automatic car wash. And so the brushes and the motors and all those things need to be replaced. In addition, we want to repaint the parking lot, the rental car parking lot over there. We want to add some arrows to make it clear it's one way. We get some tremendously bad ideas from time to time. We also want to make it clear there's some no parking areas in there and with some paint. And then the stalls need to be repainted. We did a fog seal. It's been about 3 years ago. And sometimes the paint you put on top of the fog seal doesn't adhere well. And you can certainly see that now. The paint is worn through. So we want to do about $37,000 worth of work. Laura has already briefed the rental car companies, and they're supportive of using the CFCs for those expenses. And those dollars can't be used for general revenue. They have to be used for rental cars. So we think it's a good use of the money too. So we'd like permission to spend $37,000 on rental car maintenance items.
Pretty simple one. Any comments, questions, concerns?
I move to do that.
Get stuff done. I like it. All right, I have a motion. Any additional comments?
Just plant the grass.
All right, can I get a second? Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye and nay. The ayes have it. Item number 4, capital purchase, Wi-Fi and parking lot communication.
Yeah, now that we have fiber into the building, we want to do some upgrades. One of the things is we'll add some new Wi-Fi hotspots into the building, including back here. The hotspots that we have in the secure area were purchased during the 14 remodel, and so if you know that technology at all, they just get saturated. They're not fast enough, but by the time you get 4, 5, 6 years down the road, you need to upgrade them so that they can keep up with everyone's streaming and whatever else they're doing on their phone. And so we'd like to do this upgrade to replace some of those Wi-Fi hotspots. We also want to get a quicker connection between the parking lot, which is a completely different system with its own server, and our server. We like that it's a different system with a different server because some of the information that collects we don't really want intermixed with our server. And so, but we want to be able to shuttle the video faster. We have some latency right now in the video, which our guys use that video for the customer service calls. When someone comes in and they're trying to shove their credit card in the dollar bill thing, they like to be able to tell them, well, you're not doing it right, or your card's upside down, or this thing doesn't take cash at all, those types of things. And so it makes it much harder to do that with the latency we have. This will help clean some of that up. So we'd like to spend $15,000 to replace the Wi-Fi components and some of the parking lot interface components.
Have most of the headaches been ironed out with the parking system?
I think it works pretty flawlessly. I mean, to me, from time to time, like any equipment, we have some that go down. And interestingly, the one lane that used to take cash and credit card, that one seems to be our biggest headache. That machine just has more downtime. So as we replace those original lanes and go to, I think, ones that only do credit card, that will improve that. But I mean, really, we don't have.
Not too often.
No. And we had, early on, a couple things. There was a router that was plugged in that didn't go anywhere. It just kind of went in and then back in again, and that was causing the router would go offline and knock the whole system off. But then we figured out that it wasn't doing anything, so we just unplugged it, and that fixed quite a bit of the problems. I mean, it's still a human issue, right? I mean, so you still get people that get out there and they don't have any cash, which we don't have a good way to remedy that. But for the most part, definitely.
Yeah, a couple times a year get a hiccup.
Yeah.
Any additional comments on the Wi-Fi? All right, can I get a motion to upgrade the Wi-Fi and parking lot system for an amount not to exceed $15,000? Got a motion, any additional comments?
It's got to include this room.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
All right, can I get a second?
I'll say.
Got a motion and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye and nay. And the ayes have it. All right, item number 5, Director's Compensation Recommendation. This was largely accomplished last weekend. This should be fairly short, but for the time being, we will close this session as the individual's right to privacy outweighs the public's right to know on this issue. Shouldn't take hopefully more than 10 minutes. And then we will bring you back in, John, and we'll open it up again. It's about the fastest we've ever moved. All right, are we good to go? Camera's on. Awesome. We will go ahead and reopen the meeting. Same members still present. On item number 5, Director's Compensation Recommendation. So all the feedback was formally given last month. We took care of that with John, but we had some open questions with the compensation that we wanted to discuss, so we just got that taken care of. So what we would like to offer for John for your work, obviously we told you last month how much we do appreciate the work you're doing around here. Looking at a 3.7% increase on the contract, so that's $192,000 total, and additionally 5 additional personal days in addition to your 18 that you're getting at the moment. We're going to look at the language. We'll determine that at a later date if it'll be vacation or personal. But we'll give you 5 additional days on top of what you've got now, just with everything you have going on in your life. So,
Thank you very much.
yeah.
And then all the other fringe stay the same, surpassed with the car.
Yep, the car remains the same. We didn't extend the contract only for the only reason that we just did that last year. So we can relook at that in future years. But that's what we'll give you for this year. So
Great, thank you very much.
we appreciate the work. So I guess we need to make a motion to vote on that. So if I can get a motion to approve director contract 3.78% raise, $192,000 total, and 5 additional personal days.
So moved.
Got a motion? Any additional comments?
Seconded.
Got a second? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And nay. The ayes have it. Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Any additional
Well deserved.
Yeah. Any additional airport board comments?
Yes, I have a little recognition for Ms. Laura. I received a phone call at Friday night, date night. Because I'm on the Airport Authority Board apparently. And my phone rang and it was there was a group of 24 students that were stranded in DC. They had been there for the week, and apparently I have people. And so I started making some phone calls because they were going to miss their flight in Minneapolis, and they would be stuck. If they could get to Minneapolis, their plane was delayed in DC, they could make it to Minneapolis, but would the plane stay? And they got told that the Great Falls Airport would close. They couldn't get to Great Falls, which I didn't think that was accurate information. So I tried to reach John, and then my brain went, oh, I still have the ability to find out Laura's cell phone number. So I called Laura, and I walked out of the Max into their coffee bar area, the lobby, and I had Laura in one ear, and I had Leanne in the other, and they're both talking to me. And so I said, I'm going to give you each other's numbers, and you can solve this problem. I'm going back to my beer. So they got home the next day. I got a text thanking me for the connection to Laura. But Laura, whatever you did to work with the Delta employees, we appreciate that. They got home about 1:30 in the morning. So they were very happy that some work got done for them to get them into the airport. So
It was a chain because I had Terry here and Delta over here.
Yes.
So we had quite the line
4 phones
going.
going on at the same time. So it was
Delta
quite
actually held the flight in Minneapolis?
They did.
25
It
people.
went high up, 29 total with chaperones. So
Yeah.
it went up the chain, and they said we're not going to leave them behind and have
That's
to
good.
figure out what to do.
I mean, it
with
would
them.
take them days to catch that many up from Minneapolis.
Yeah.
That's what I was telling Laura, because then she called me and I said, well, see if they can get to Salt Lake tonight, because at least then there's probably enough capacity with 3 flights to get them back the next day. Because my guess was Minneapolis, you wouldn't have that many open seats for
You'd have to go to
days.
Salt Lake and then back up.
And that's what they told
Regional.
them, it was 2 days. And then the chaperones
Yeah.
were willing to each take 6 kids. And I'm like, can you get on United? Can you get on another flight? You know, they were trying to work everything they could to get out of.
What's
that mess.
disappointing is, we're starting to see the airlines scapegoating the airports on these things. And so when you hear that in the community that, oh, the airports won't wait, that's a complete fabrication. We have a 24-hour tower, and they don't need any airport staff to be here in order to accept the flight. So when you hear that, it's one of 2 things. Either their crew's going to time out, which is the most likely. The pilot is going to be at the end of their 10 hours, and they don't have a way to extend that now. In the old days you did. Or number 2, their ground crew won't come back because sometimes they can't get a hold of them. That's happened before. We've had flights that were going to come back in late, and they tried to call a ground crew and they couldn't get a hold of people to get them back here to service the plane. But even then, we've taken flights before where we didn't have a ground crew here. I mean, we've driven loading bridges, we've figured it out, to make it happen, and Dwight has too. His folks have come over and helped out with that too. So when you hear that, especially when you're out traveling, challenge it. I had a similar call last year on a Salt Lake flight where it was the airport was closing. The airport closed at midnight. I'm like, we don't close at midnight. And so I mean, that's usually not the case when you hear that.
We get blamed for closed runways in the winter.
In the wintertime, and the pilot doesn't want to fly it. And
I was just surprised from the fact that there was, a couple months ago, there was like 9 or 10 of us out of Great Falls going to San Diego through Salt Lake City. And they knocked us off our flight to San Diego. We of course, San Diego or Salt Lake, you gotta get on the bus, you gotta do this. 9, 10 people with kids running through the terminal to get to
And they
the
left
gate
without you.
as they're pushing the airplane back. And they could not get all of us on another flight that same day
Yeah.
because everything was booked. And it turns out the reason, or what they did was an LAX flight got canceled earlier in that morning, so they took all these people that were going to LAX and put them on the flight to San Diego to get them down there. It was discouraging.
Yeah, and really in the last couple of years, they have gotten better about holding flights because now there isn't any capacity to get people out. If they miss, 20 people, I mean, it's days to get them back in. And so we do see them holding more flights and doing more of that for people. But yeah, it is a difficult time because everything's stretched so thin. And now that they can't fudge the 10-hour rule, really that at some point that plane's either got to go or it's not going at all. So.
Then I had a question. You guys been promoting the parking app.
Yeah.
Do you have any data on how that's going?
It's not used much. We don't see much usage every month. It's just a few $1,000s go through that app, which is okay. We want to get people, really the best use of that app is if you don't have cash, like many of the young people don't have cash or a credit card, but they will have Google Pay. And so we're able to use that app for the people that have Apple Pay or Google Pay. So that's been the best use of that so far. When we get around to where we're going to do some work in the parking lot, Rod and I have kind of a plan. We want to build an exit at the back of this lot that's all the way out to the right. That would be just for people that use that app to take the pressure off the toll plaza. So then I think as the business travel returns in particular, we'll get those people that know, while I'm walking off the plane, I'm going to go ahead and pay for parking. And then I can use that slip lane to get out of the parking lot quicker. So that'll be, I think, when we really can use that app even more. Currently, we pay a little bit more for that app. It's only a few cents. I think it's like 14 cents or something we pay for
I
that.
think when you use it, it's 50 cents.
Yeah, it's 50 cents. And so I think that discourages the use of it some. But eventually, I think the convenience factor will factor into that. So yeah, we tell people about it. The main reason we tell people is because if they have Google Pay or Apple Pay and that's how they like to pay, then they can do that. But it's not a big group. The other one that surprises me is Turo. We're still not seeing, and we'll see, June will be a good test, but we're not seeing the explosion of Turo that you see in Missoula and Bozeman. I just don't think we quite have that younger traveler that's used to using that service like those two markets.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
So Turo is basically,
The medical school.
it's Airbnb. Oh no, the other Turo. It's Airbnb for your car. So you can take your car and you can put it on Turo, and it's kind of a cross between Airbnb and what's the cab one? Lyft and Uber. So they provide the insurance, they provide the platform, they provide the payment, and then you just basically put your car somewhere and say, my car's here if you want to rent it. And then somebody gets online and says, oh, you want $85 a day for your Jeep Renegade? I'll do that. And they rent your Jeep Renegade. And so then they drive it around, and they bring it back to where they got it from, and the transaction's all handled by the app. And so now we get 10% of those transactions.
I think it was bigger too when there were less cars that were available with the rented cars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're still out of cars.
Yeah, we're still.
We don't have as many people participating with Turo than you do in a Bozeman or a Missoula.
Yeah, and it's not just us that's out of cars. If you look to rent a car, which I've been looking, a couple markets the last few months, and it's ridiculous to rent a car anywhere still. So there's still a very tight car supply out there. It's just for whatever reason, we're not attracting the people that use Turo. Because there are some cool cars out there, though, if you want to rent them.
Some cool cars, and they're also all the fees and the taxes on that. I mean, you're able to probably get a better deal sometimes.
Sometimes you
Yeah.
certainly are. Yeah.
And that's the incentive, but I just don't think the knowledge is out there yet.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you certainly are, because when you look at those Turos, generally those cars don't change in price. I mean, a guy has one of those fancy Jeep, Jeeps that's $85 a day, but then, here at the airport, sometimes that becomes a Corolla, And so, I mean, if you know about Turo in a market you're in, you might be able to get a much better car, for a cheaper rate as those rates climb up in the summertime. Because generally the people that are on Turo aren't paying attention to the rental car market at all. So sometimes you could get a, like a nice luxury car or a sports car or something like that for the same price that you're renting a Corolla or something at a.
I think the ability to guarantee that you're going to get, to me, is key.
That's.
I mean, if you need a Suburban because you got 8 people and you land wherever you're going and, oh, we just gave our last Suburban, you take this full-size.
Geo Metro.
It's not going to work, yeah. So I think the ability to guarantee what you're.
That's a big deal,
There's
because
usually
it goes the other way too, because they'll go, oh, we're out of those cars, Todd, but we'll upgrade you. And you say, I don't want an upgrade, because I don't want it, that kind of.
Well, right, I want like 8
You know, I
miles
mean,
to the gallon.
And so, thanks for that upgrade, I don't want an upgrade, well, sorry,
Yeah.
you have to take it.
I'm almost always on that side of it.
Yeah,
I
that's what
don't
I'm
want
on.
the giant car because I'm trying to get better mileage.
Or be able to park.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, in towns that only have compact spots and you're driving the Suburban, it's always my favorite.
Salt Lake City.
All right, any additional comments, Commissioner Hogan?
First world problems.
Commissioner Dimbo?
No.
Commissioner Ernst? I have no additional comments. Any additional public comments? Thank you guys for being here. With no further business to come before the board, I declare this meeting adjourned. See you in August.
Yeah, not till August. Have a good summer.
You 2 weeks ago, no?
First week of August.
There you go.
Yeah, first week of August.
Wonder-
Yeah.